Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Healthy AF podcast. With me today is Michael Kummer. Michael, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've known each other a bit, but Michael is the
Yeah.
host of his own podcast, the Primal Shift podcast, where he's actually had me as a guest just a couple of months ago. We met in Costa Rica at
Yeah.
Paul Saladino's retreat
Yeah, that was fun.
in, what was it, 2021?
I think it was. Yeah, it's been a while. Time goes by
Yeah,
so quickly, but I think, yeah, it was 2021. Sounds about right.
2021 summer, and that was cool. We and of course ran into each other at KetoCon and Hack Your Health, which is coming up this
hmm
year.
Yeah.
So we're running in the same circles, but I wanted to bring Michael on to talk about really just sourcing your own food, sourcing your food,
Yeah.
and what that can look like. Because you're really diving into this full force with just like many of the move towards trying to find, create food security for yourself, some
Yeah.
self-sufficiency, sourcing meat and other food. So what is it we were talking offline, but you're making a big move this year, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. We started with, homesteading on a smaller scale. We just have a bit of an acre here in
Mm,
Georgia. And, we're doing some things, we have chickens, we have rabbits for meat, we have, honeybees for honey. We have some geese. We have, well, that's about it. And a German Shepherd, we're not going to eat him.
yeah,
And,
right.
but we realized, it's if we want to do more and we really want to grow most of the protein that we consume, and we consume a boatload of protein. And,
Right.
there again, our dog, he consumes about 90 pounds of meat per month. So he's
Wow.
actually the biggest meat eater in the
I
family.
guess he
Um,
is.
which is not only expensive, but obviously also, put some burden on, sourcing the right, types of meat for him and for us as well. And so, yes, we actually purchased some acreage this year, and we are planning on moving up there sometime next year, probably, to take the whole homesteading experience to the next level in terms of, raising cattle, dairy cows, beef cattle, obviously, doing the whole rotational grazing or management intensive grazing, pigs, because we like pork, but, all of the pork you can find is really not so great.
Right.
And, really anything in between, anything that can, help us be in control of our own food supply, not being so reliant on, whatever, the powers that be might decide in terms of, taxing or restricting or encouraging or, what have you, and putting
Right.
farmers, in difficult position where they sometimes cannot make, the best decision for the consumer. And one good example is, chickens. Even if you purchase the best, pasture raised chickens or whatever, it's still Cornish cross, birds for the most part in 99% of the cases. Those are not healthy breeds by any stretch of the imagination. And they are fed a diet that's, high in PUFAs. And the thing is with monogastric animals, they are what they eat. So if they eat
Yeah.
the diet high in PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, that's what ends up in their meat and their fat. And that's what then we consume. And we are also, monogastric animals. So, it kind of, goes full circle. And so this year, actually, in about 3 weeks, depending on, when you watch or listen to this episode, I will be getting our first batch of Rangers, different type of slower growing chicken breed. And we have finally found a source of low PUFA feed that uses olive oil instead of, the traditional seed oils or vegetable oils that
Hmm.
binds the minerals to the feed. It's super expensive. Definitely is not gonna, be a huge cost saving factor there. But at least we know that if we want to consume chickens, and raise them in the way they're supposed to raise and feed them in the way they're supposed to be fed, we can do that now. And so
Mhm.
that's kind of the plan, to really be in control and do everything not perfect, because perfect doesn't exist, but as good as we possibly can. And
Mm.
unfortunately, that very often doesn't exist in the realm of, pork and chicken in particular, or turkey
Right.
for that matter. And so
Right.
that's what we're gonna try doing. It's easier with beef. So
Oh
if,
yeah.
if beef is rotationally grazed, there's usually not an issue, and you can find that, almost anywhere.
Yeah.
But still,
Sheep as
it's
well. Sheep is another good one.
sheep is,
Sheep.
and basically anything that's ruminant. It's
Yeah.
much easier to do it right, because they don't require, for the most part, additional feed. They just need grass. And
Right.
as long as you provide that in decent quality, then, you're good to go. But monogastric animals are a little bit more challenging. And so that's kind of, we've been trying to learn a lot of lessons, make a lot of mistakes here on a smaller scale, and then really expand that next year and the following years on a larger scale, where then, we can produce hopefully all of the protein, and I think also a lot of the carbohydrates. I mean, I mentioned honey already, we already have
Mhm.
bees. We harvest about 70 pounds of honey that we consume in a year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
never realized how much honey we eat, but we go through everything we harvest for the most part. And so, we're also getting now more into taking we're not huge veggie eaters, but our veggie garden a little bit more seriously, growing some of the least toxic plants and having learned some of the mitigation techniques to maybe fine tune those
Sure.
veggies that might not be optimal, but with the proper mitigation techniques, be it fermenting, soaking, sprouting, what have you, the whole 9 yards, you can make them work if you're metabolically healthy. And so we've gotten into that a little bit more as well, taking that more seriously. And it's been fun. And, really knowing that, sometimes, I have a meal and I look down at it, and it's all grown, right here on this property. It's not even a
Wow.
farm yet, and it's a home, and we live in a residential neighborhood at the end of the day. But
Mm.
knowing that we've grown, the rabbit, with the honey, and maybe, some of the figs that come from the garden or whatever, it's priceless, at the end of the day.
Are you able to grow figs down there? You're warm
Yeah,
enough to
yeah,
grow
yeah, yeah.
figs. Oh,
Uh-huh.
good.
The fig tree is actually doing really well. It's no pests whatsoever. In comparison to an apple tree or a pear tree, so much
Yeah.
easier. And it don't have to do anything other than hoping for enough rain throughout the year.
Yeah. They grow forever. They live forever. I mean, and I
Yeah.
mean, decades. I mean, I know you're going to be
Yeah.
moving. You guys are getting, you said 45 acres.
Yep.
That's going to give you so much room to do all these things. It's like you're just going to expand your projects to be, I mean, my gosh. Yeah, that's exciting. Man, your kids are getting quite an education. You have two kids?
With two kids, they're home or really unschooled. So, and that's was also one of the reasons that we really want to introduce them early on to what it means to, live a healthy life, but also be in
Mhm.
control of that very life, not depend on others to, feed you and provide you with some of the stuff that you absolutely need, to live a life. And food is
Right.
obviously, food and water are two of the, most important things. And so, yeah, they have a ball, just
I
well,
bet.
not having to get up at 6 to catch the school bus,
Right.
but also be responsible, like the older one, she's doing, morning chores, that sort of thing, and so
That's
I know
great.
that she goes down when she wakes up and takes care of the animals, and then at night the same thing again. And it's yeah, it's inspiring to see, how they grew up and how they get a different perspective than probably, you and I have
Oh
gotten,
yeah.
growing up, knowing where, stuff comes from, especially food.
That's I was just gonna ask that or mention that is because a lot of kids don't know where food comes from. They'll look at their plate and they look at whatever meat might say meat is on the plate. They have no idea
Right.
what it is. They don't know,
Yeah.
and even if you tell them the name of it, some of them don't even know where it came from, like which animal it came from.
Right.
Oh, it came from
Yeah.
that, or it came from this. It's like, yeah. I mean, things that we take for granted. Kids
Right.
these days really have no
Yeah.
idea one where their food comes from, what it is, and the work it took to produce it. They
Yeah.
think he's just sitting at the grocery store waiting for their mom to go get, or whatever,
Right.
or
Yeah.
someone to bring home and cook for them and put on that plate. And they have no idea from the beginning to their plate what it took to get there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's funny if you see, certain people, they'll kind of like, or when kids, I should say, will get squeamish about it. I mean, they're like, "Oh, it came from a lamb. It came from a,
Uh,
and your kids understand that because they're hands on involved in it. And it's like,
yeah.
no, it's not pretty. It's not a bedtime
Mm,
story. It's not a nursery rhyme. It's life. It's
right.
life. It's what it
Yeah.
takes to survive. And it's a huge lesson that I think is being lost in our urban environments where they
Yeah.
truly don't have any. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had this. My early. It's brought back a memory of my early years when I was very young. We had 5 acres. We
Hmm.
had a couple cows, a couple of horses, and some chickens. And I was 3, 4 years old. And I have this memory burned in my skull, which is almost traumatic. Um, my dad, for whatever reason, decided it was time to butcher the chickens. And so we go
Right.
up the hill, cut the heads off, and we're walking down the hill, and they're all running down the hill with us, heads off, bleeding out of the neck. And I'm freaking like, this is the weirdest thing I'm for. And it's burned to myself. Like, this is the weirdest thing ever. A little, like I said, a little startled, a little like I could have been warned maybe, but it's a lesson. It's like, this is what it takes to make food. It's like, it's understanding that, there's not just work, but there is sacrifice that comes with feeding ourselves for survival. And that's being lost, and the harsh truth of it, of death, that you have to raise an animal and then kill it and butcher it. Like, that's what people took for granted up until about 100 years ago or so.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, and I did not grow up on a farm. I had no exposure to butchering an animal. I've always been an animal lover. I had pets and, cried when they died or, what have you.
Yeah.
And when it came down, I think the first animal that we butchered was actually a rabbit. And, I mean,
cute fuzzy bunny. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cute fuzzy bunny with little ears and looks at you funny, and exactly.
Yeah. And it's not a pleasant experience, and really wrapping your head around that. We've been, I mean, especially with the rabbits, with the chickens too. I mean, with the first flock of chickens, I mean, they were in our house, the kids, basically used them as, as pets, or as, they brought them in, they were, jumping around on us. We could pick them up. We treated them like a pet at the end of the day. And with the rabbits, obviously the same, because they are, fluffy and everything. And, every night, the kids had some little bunnies, in bed. And then at some point, the time came, that little bunny, I mean, the good news is that the bigger they get, the less cute they are. That's really the only thing that,
just
makes
like kids.
it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But, not pleasant still. And it was, even for me, it was like different. And my wife noticed, for the rest of the day, I was incredibly quiet, after I had butchered, 7 rabbits that we had raised and loved and fed and and all of that. I'm like, okay, but now it's time to, turn you into food. And I think a lot of people cannot wrap their head around how can you, love and care for an animal and then take its life, and you really have to understand that this is how it's meant to be. And it doesn't really matter if you're religious or not, or, how you see it from a spiritual perspective, but ultimately, if it boils down to it, this is what we need to do to sustain our own life. And it's okay, it's just at the end of the day. And if we do it in the most, humane way, none of the animals that we butchered have suffered, they have, screamed or what have you, it was all very calm, very quiet. And it is just what it is. But it's still tough,
Sure.
And I think kids need to learn that, this is how it works, and what you said before, being able to not only know where food is coming from, but being able to differentiate between food and food-like substances, which is so, I mean, if you go to the grocery store, most of the food you see is not food, it just looks like food,
Right.
And I think that skill set is incredibly important for whatever else you want to achieve in your life. If you don't know, to pick the right food, whatever you, do professionally or otherwise, you're going to be somehow impaired by less than optimal health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We're seeing it. We're seeing a culture, a country living on processed food, and we're spreading it all over the world. And we're seeing how we're spreading diabetes and obesity and everything else across the world into Asia, where it wasn't seen before, and Europe which was always ahead of us in health, is now beginning to see, I think, more and more of that from the processed food. Still better than we are, still better positioned than we are health-wise in their food sourcing, and they're taking more steps to protect, I think, the public from certain farming practices. But at the same time, we are the example of how not to do it when it comes to modernizing your diet. We have modernized it to the point that we have created new lifestyle diseases that just weren't here 150 years ago. Certainly not on the scale they are now. They were at 1% of the population, not 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of the population. No, just what about people say, hey, that's great. That's great that you're farming. I'm not sure I can commit to that. Couldn't I just go to the farmer's market and source my food that way? Couldn't I just go get all the fruits and veggies and the meat even, and I think local farmers, I definitely encourage people, to go to local ranches, local, farmers. If you're going to, buy that way, I think that's ideal. Go to the farm, if that's your
Yes.
place. But what you're doing is taking a step further. What's your perspective on the farmer's market?
I mean, buying local, I think is generally a great idea. I think everything else being equal, you're better off buying locally
Hmm.
at the farmer's market or what have you. The one thing that I want to point out is that a lot of people are under the misconception that if they buy at the farmer's market, then it's the best possible food, they can get, meaning it's organic, it has not been sprayed, it's, grass-fed meat, and whatever else you want to assume might not necessarily be true, and again, this might, be different between regions and farmers
Hmm.
markets and etc. But like at least in our case, when we went there and said, okay, let's buy, all the produce we don't grow and we want to buy at the farmers market. And we started asking, hey, so is it, do you spray? Or it doesn't have to be organic, USDA organic, because I understand that certification is expensive. And if you're a smaller farm, you're not going to jump through the hoops of getting that certification,
Right.
or any other, certification for that matter. But, do you spray your stuff? And the majority of, farmers said, yes, we do. So yes, it's local. Yes, it hasn't, been trucked, across the country. But if I buy strawberries here in Georgia that are, laden with pesticides, is that any
Hmm.
better than the ones I can buy in the store? Maybe, maybe not. But and then again, strawberries being a great example. I mean, a lot of the, fruits and berries in particular, they're grown, hydroponically, so they are never in touch with
Hmm.
soil. So one could argue, well, is it really as nutrient dense as a berry grown in soil, organically,
Right.
versus with substrates? Depends on the type of substrates, is it, synthetic stuff, or is it maybe, derived from compost and cow manure, which might be the same. But I would argue, there are so many little details then that if you really want to get the best food possible, the healthiest food possible, you have to ask those questions and not necessarily assume just because, your local farmer does it, you know, then
Right.
it is the best food you can buy. And unfortunately, the reason for that is that there is very often no incentive of doing it the right way, or it would be cost prohibitive to do it the right way, because you're competing. Nobody understands anymore what a whole chicken, is supposed to cost if
Hmm.
raised appropriately. Or to make it even simpler, because we have, that example, we have 35, egg laying hens in our backyard, feeding them, organic, no corn, no soy, no PUFA or low PUFA feed, meaning that it doesn't have any vegetable or seed oils, but olive oil
Hmm.
to bind the minerals to the feed. That feed is incredibly expensive. And if we calculate how much it costs us to raise or to get one egg, it's more expensive than most of the eggs you can find in the store, even the
Hmm.
ones from, pasture-raised hens or whatever. And so, if someone tells you then, hey, the carton of eggs is $12 and you can get it for three, or let's say, the best ones in the store you can get for six, seven, or eight, again, depending on the
Right.
region where you live, but at least here in Georgia, then anyone would say, I'm not going to pay $12 for a carton of eggs, or I'm not going to pay $40 for a whole chicken. But this
Right.
is what food really costs, and doing it cheap, or comparing it with food that was raised, with government support, where a farmer can then sell the food at a price that is maybe below what it costs to producing it, you
Right.
cannot compete, And so again, everything else being equal, buying locally is probably better than buying from a store where they, get it from who knows where, even maybe outside of the country, especially produce that might not even be ripe by the time, it arrives here and then is, like ripened, in a warehouse or something. But it doesn't, don't assume farmers market means highest quality food. That's I think a misconception, and you need to ask questions and again be involved and be knowledgeable so you can ask those questions, so you know what questions to ask, and how to interpret the answer.
Right. Right. There's certainly environmental benefits to local sourcing, and there's
Yes.
just being part of that community and supporting those local efforts for great food, because
Yes.
that is I think that does benefit food security as well, as knowing where you have food available nearby. So
For
it's
sure.
in your region, as opposed to having to have something trucked in, or so
Yes.
the logistics being interrupted.
Yeah. No, for
But
sure. I mean, we
so it's
buy an entire cow each year from a local farm here in Georgia, and we know
yeah,
it's grass fed. It just makes sense. And even if we,
right,
pay more than what we would pay by getting, a traditionally or conventionally raised cow, grain-fed cow from somewhere else in the country, we
right.
know that we are, supporting the local economy, and we are supporting our own health ultimately by, sourcing the proper food. But, again, ask the questions,
Right.
and know what to look for.
Right. Yeah, it's a big market. You can choose your farmers. You can choose the people you want to
Exactly.
work with
Vote
who
with
are
your dollar, at the end of the day. If at the farmers market, if they get like 100 customers, and every customer asks, "Hey, do you spray your stuff?" and the answer is yes, and they, walk away, that tells you something, that maybe those customers would be willing to pay a little more to get, stuff that has not been
right.
exposed to pesticides or, synthetic, fertilizer, what have you. And so at the end of the day, I think it's good to provide feedback so farmers know, what the market wants, what customers
Right.
want, and to get an idea of whether or not, customers are willing to pay. I mean, we are selling our excess eggs for, something that we think makes sense, and, based on what they are worth it, the time we put in, the high quality feed we use, and the ones who pay for it are evidently willing to do so because they know they get the best possible eggs that they cannot find in grocery stores. And so there
Hmm.
is always a market, I think, for high quality stuff, especially, among, the community that we,
Right.
operate in, so to say, because we are more health conscious and we are willing to pay a little extra to get the better stuff. And, the market is there. It's obviously not the mass market, but
Right. No,
it's there.
but we're not trying to be part of the mass,
Right,
right?
exactly.
We're trying
Exactly.
to limit mass. Yeah, personally.
Yeah.
So and so that's and improve our health. So that's we're in a minority, but so are these farmers, and
Yes.
they're trying to do things the right way. So like you said, it's important to support the ones that are doing it correctly, and provide that feedback, because
Yeah.
the health risks associated with industrial agriculture. So whether it's industrial beef or farming in general, I mean, we've seen even with vegetables out of Central California, you see salmonella outbreaks and stuff coming
Yeah.
from the spinach and the leafy stuff. So there's a lot more health risk buying your food through the mass market,
Yes. Yeah.
and not just because of some odd bacteria, but in just, again, the way it's raised, what could be the composition of that food with the mineral density. I
Right.
mean, there's a lot of unknowns, and that people just kind of take for granted, I
Right.
think,
Yeah.
from that
Yeah.
industrial. What do you guys see? I mean, from what you're creating there, what would you say the biggest um, benefits are in, for far as nutrients, and avoiding the industrial food complex?
I think that I mean, obviously, health is an important aspect, but
Yeah.
also mental health at the end of the day. Because for me, it provides contrast to the work that I'm doing in front of the computer. I'm kind of, part of the hamster wheel, for my day job. Even though, I removed myself from corporate America, so to say, and, I do my own thing, but it's still, meeting, and,
Yeah.
deliverables, and, appointments and whatnot. It's still a very fast-paced life at the end of the day that I don't think is that I don't think is beneficial to, my overall health, especially my mental health. And so by being able to disconnect from that, doing manual labor, shoveling dirt, being exposed to animals, being, having to, care for animals. I think all of that has
Right.
had a positive impact on, the well-being of the entire family, mentally as well as from a health perspective. We get, inoculated with new germs. We are
Exactly.
getting basically our nature's, booster shots,
Right.
so to say.
Very healthy biome. Right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
without any mRNA,
Right.
just by being, by having, occasionally a dirty egg, or by, having your hands dirty, what have you. And so I
We
think
have the
that
animals
has,
in your house,
I mean, we try not to, have too many animals in our house because they belong, in the backyard, but they
but it
end up,
happens.
it
Yeah.
happens. I mean, especially whenever there's a new litter of bunnies. I mean, the kids bring them in every single night. We have them in their bed, in our couch, and and it's
Yeah,
unavoidable.
but there's a benefit. That's what we're talking
Oh
about. There's
yeah,
a
for
benefit
sure.
to that, to having the biodiversity.
Yes.
It's not just exposure for your immune system. It's like you're benefiting from their immune system and what they're getting from the dirt. I mean, it's just
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's incalculable. I
Yes.
think, and it's probably going to just be even more profound when you move to that 45 acres and you have
Yeah.
more animals and you're spending more. You're going to spend a lot more time on 45 acres than you are on one. You're
Yeah.
going to be you're going to be out on the farm quite a bit there.
Yeah, yeah, I already got my overall and the whole, out on the
And
farm.
your hat and yeah.
The hat I don't have yet, but that's next on
Okay.
my list.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, that aspect obviously is, and then I feel like, the more we go back to, some of the ways that humans have lived, you know, hundreds of years ago,
Right.
thousands of years ago, I think the more beneficial it is overall, because being with the animals means being outside, being, exposed to sunlight, being exposed to, cold temperatures, hot temperatures, all of the things that, as part of our, biohacking efforts, we are trying to kind of, squeeze in and mitigate the lack of, natural exposure with sauna
Right.
bathing, with cold plunging, with, all of those things, you naturally get by just doing that work, by
Right.
farming at the end of the day, by taking care of the animals. And so that's one thing. And then I also, again, thinking forward, from a food security perspective, from being as independent as possible and as disconnected, or at least being able to not only survive, but thrive in the event, let's say there is a power outage that takes
Mhm.
that's longer than a couple of hours. We already had a 3-day power outage here, and some of the people around us, they fell apart because their phone, couldn't charge the phone, and TV didn't work, and all of those things. But also it means no hot water, and a lot of other things, no cooking maybe if you have an electric stove, and no AC, no heating. And so being, or being able to disconnect from that, either because you have to, because of an, I don't know, natural disaster, whatever the case might be, or because you choose to, I think is one way back towards a slower, less hectic, and healthier life overall. And that's our ultimate goal, to go as far back as possible without
Mm,
giving up some of the benefits of our modern life. I mean, I have no
sure.
intention of running around in a loincloth and living in the woods. Um, but if I want to do that, I want to do it and feel comfortable with it, and not fall
Right.
apart because I have to be without much clothing, in the cold or in the heat or whatever the case might be. Get back to some of that, life that, humans and our ancestors have endured for a very long time and have done so successfully.
True. True. And really, I mean, just the way most, like in the US, the majority of people lived on a farm or somewhere out of a city in a rural environment prior to 1900 or 1890,
Yeah.
really is when the shift started moving, the Industrial Revolution, all that started moving people into the city. Maybe a little off on the dates there, but through most of the 1800s,
Yeah.
we lived on farms. We didn't start moving into cities. We didn't have the majority of people in cities until the 20th century.
Yeah.
And that shift, and then and that's when we started having all the processed food, the processed
Right.
fats, the Crisco, and all that started really coming into play. Instead of creating our food, we were being marketed to for food and selling food that's
Right.
been prepared. And
Right.
that's that shift. That whole shift has really taken us down a
Yeah.
bad road. We got a lack of foresight. Now we can look back and say, "Oh wow, hindsight 2020." We can see where that took us, and maybe,
Hmm.
like you said, mitigate some of that by changing our environment. We don't have to go back in time. We don't have to completely cut ourselves off from the benefits of modern. I mean, you make a living through work remotely, work on your farm, um, from your computer, creating content because of that modern,
Right.
because of the modern times we're in, and you don't need to cut off from that, but you can improve your health. I mean, I'm interested. Do you track your sleep,
Yeah. Hmm.
like a Oura ring or something like that, or Whoop,
Yeah.
or
Whoop and
yep,
ordering and
both? Yeah, you got double going on. Yeah, I did the Aura. I'd be interested to see once you guys get out there
yeah.
what your sleep does. That you
Hmm.
spend more time in the dirt, more time in the sun, more time outside working. Just being exposed to. You're going to have more land to be on.
Yeah.
How that affects your sleep.
Yes. And really everything else too, like cravings throughout the day. And, and we notice this every single time, we go to Costa Rica, where my wife's from.
Mm-hmm.
And, last time we went, actually just a couple of weeks ago, in January, we came back and, we spent time, at a beach house. It was actually up in a mountain, and we were at the beach every day in the sun every day. I was actually in the sun a little bit too much. I figured
Yeah.
my Georgia tan, is good enough for Costa Rica. It was not.
No.
Um, and so, we noticed that we eat differently.
Mm.
We behave differently as far as our, stress levels and everything is concerned. We sleep differently. Everything appears to be better, even though, Costa Rica is certainly not, the perfect country as far as food is concerned. I mean, it's almost,
No.
depending on where you are, almost more difficult to find proper sources of food because unfortunately, they have Americanized a lot. And,
Yes.
but nevertheless, just the fact that you're more outside, not in your home, maybe not in a home that, has mold and you don't know it. And I say this because, since we're planning on building a house from scratch, we want to do it right. And we, want to pay attention to VOCs and all of the things that could potentially be harmful. And we live in a house now that was built in the 1980s. And so we started reading books about building science and how, what to pay attention to and how things are just done here in this country. And buildings, the way houses are built, residential house in particular, is like how food is produced in this country. It's all fast food. It's all crap. It's all junk, And so no surprise that living in those buildings and spending the majority of your time in those buildings is detrimental to your health. And why so many people struggle, I think, that try to do everything right, that eat well, that exercise, that cold plunge and sauna bathe, and they are still not feeling 100% every day or on most days. And you wonder, how on earth is it possible, And I think, our generally the environment we live in and that we expose ourselves to has a lot to do with that. The building obviously, but just having a regular job, I think is detrimental to your health. Now that doesn't mean everyone can quit their job and say, I'm going to live on the beach now. But you just have to realize that most of what we've been doing to make life better and easier and more convenient is 100% detrimental to our health. And going back from there and finding ways to simplify and to do things, I guess, the old way, as far as, food is concerned, growing your food, sourcing your food, etc., is I think is important if you don't want to fall apart, and more so, for if you have kids, and you want to give them the best possible, outlook on life as far as health is concerned.
Right. And they just grow up. I mean, moving, playing, being outside, and I mean, it's just they're just healthier with all of that activity. Yeah. And you mentioned, so you're building your house in a way. I know Georgia. I live in Tennessee. You're in Georgia. We have humidity through much of the year. Mold is an issue. So you're building your house in a way to keep to prevent certain amount of mold within the walls and so forth.
When we are trying to, we don't know yet if we can even afford what we want to do. So we're in the early stages of, we have an idea of what we want to do. But, as with everything else in this country, unfortunately, if you want to do it the right way, it's significantly more expensive than if you go just, the regular route, conventional route. So we don't know yet, but one thing, I think mold is definitely going to be one of those things we pay very close attention to, because everything I've learned about mold so far, it's so prevalent. It probably exists in most houses, and it can be one of those reasons why, you don't enjoy optimal health. It just, at the end of the day, with immunity, it's a resource thing, your body only has so many resources to, deal with, all the stressors, be it toxins, be it, poor food choices, be it, chronic stress from work, whatever. There's only so much your body can handle. And if your glass is always almost full, it's very easy then, to push yourself over the edge, and then you develop an issue, either short term, you get sick, you catch the flu or whatever, or something long term where you develop a metabolic disease. And you really need to take that, you probably cannot empty the glass in our modern lives, but at least you need to take it down a significant notch. And I think mold exposure probably plays an important role in that. And so I'm hoping that we can, afford doing it the best possible way, not the perfect way, but at least as go the pretty good house approach. That's a thing. I didn't know that, but making it as good as possible and reducing our exposure as much as possible, so that combined with everything else we are doing, we'll hopefully be in good shape.
Right. Right. Have you found a good, I know you're part of that, like you mentioned our community, the animal-based community, but have you found a good community around you down there at all, to the people that are like-minded, or do you feel still a little bit like a oddball?
I think we're gonna stick out like a sore thumb. First of all, obviously, as soon as I open my mouth, being in rural Georgia, I
Yeah, and
mean,
you're German. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like,
exactly. With my thick hard accent, it's gonna be fun. My wife's being Costa Rican, not that many Latinos in that neck of the woods either, and so and I think we already met a couple of farmers up there that are at least on the same page with us as far
okay,
as growing food and stuff is concerned. But then everything else health related, I
right,
mean, I don't think they have any idea why we are doing the things, why I'm wearing, like five toe shoes, or,
right.
whatever. All of those things, I think it's a completely foreign concept to them. And it's probably going to be an adjustment period. But the people we've met so far have been incredibly friendly and helpful and welcoming. So I'm having high hopes that we're gonna, assimilate, and I have no issues, assuming some of the, local traditions. I mean, walking around with my rifle around my neck, I can do that, not a problem. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
So you're in South Georgia? Is that you're headed to South
Now it's
Georgia?
actually gonna be we're gonna be very close to the state line of Alabama on the
Oh,
left, and
okay.
Tennessee on the north. So we're gonna be I want to say 40 minutes south of Chattanooga,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and then a mile away from the state line to Alabama.
So, oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hey,
Yeah,
you're gonna be, yeah, you're just gonna be about 2.5 hours from Nashville, really.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's won't be as hot as South Georgia. It won't be as hot and humid,
Right.
quite
Yeah.
not quite as hot as South Georgia is like, yeah, you could cut the air. You could just scoop it out
Yes.
in the summer. You could scoop it out and fill your water bottle from the air.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
um, but it's no, that's fantastic. I'm happy for you guys. I mean, I just know how much community building you could do. I've heard of people kind of getting groups and moving out and creating their own little kind of a community where different people have different roles in that community.
Commune. Uh-huh.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, but they kind of connected. A little bit of that in Texas, different places doing that. But I would imagine, I mean, if someone doesn't know, you do a lot of education, you do a lot of stuff online about sauna. And I mean, that was kind
Right.
of like your bridge into, I think this world was you were doing
Yeah.
reviews for certain things like, again, saunas, red lights, things like that. And so I
Yeah.
would imagine this is really going to broaden your education platform.
Yeah. I mean, that's yes, exactly. And the funny thing is, whenever you're like in the biohacking world, like in the
Yeah.
world that I didn't grow up in it, but at least that I've spent most of the past decade in, you see a lot of good ideas and where to source stuff, but very few people actually grow their own food
Right.
within that community, right? Especially doing it in a context of a family, which is always a little bit more complex, I guess, than doing it yourself or doing whatever you want yourself. And on the flip side, a lot of homesteaders and and people trying to grow their own food and be independent and disconnected and whatnot. Very little expertise I've noticed, in the greater scheme of health, stress management, sleep, even I would argue even food, even among those who grow their own food, there are very few that understand that, well, plants have defense chemicals,
Mhm.
not all plants are meant to be eaten, or the difference between raising Cornish cross chickens versus maybe another breed in 45 days. So
Oh,
there are a lot of disconnects and gaps, I think, between those two, and I think it's a great opportunity to kind of try to bridge that and bring all of that together and kind of share knowledge in both sides, and also just from a pure branding perspective, it kind of completes. It doesn't complete the circle because there are definitely other areas that I haven't covered yet, but it makes it more comprehensive. It really goes from producing your own food to everything else health related in the context of a family. I think um, it's a great umbrella, to work under, and also a great, obviously, teaching opportunity not only for for others who want to learn, but also in particular for our kids. That's really one of the main
Yeah.
reasons why I think we do all this. So we can not only improve our own health, but give them the foundation so they can make better choices in their own lives, once they decide to
For
go their
sure.
own way.
Right. Yeah. They'll at least have the foundation of it. They'll
Yeah,
understand it. They might go out and try to figure out which direction they want to go in, but they're going to know because they've grown up in it. They're going to know exactly what they need to
right,
do, and they'll see the example of your health, your wife's health. As you guys get older, uh, you're not going to your health is going to stand up better than
right,
the health of their friends' parents.
right.
You're gonna stand out, and as the older you get, and believe me, when you get into 50s, it's a
I know
different
we talked
ballgame.
about
I
it.
mean, it's what? Yes, it's hard. I will tell you, it's harder than your 40s. It's
Yeah.
more. You have to be more deliberate.
Mhm.
Recovery is a different issue,
Yes.
um, but at the same time, you're really going to stand out. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just you really are setting an example for them as to how to create a health span and be have a lot of vitality as you
Right.
age.
Yeah.
You're still going to be working. You're still going to be, or doing physical labor, and you're still going to be working out and being, very
Right.
strong, um, as you age. When they're having kids, when they're giving you grandchildren, you're going to be like
Right.
really, engaged, able to play, get into that, that
Right.
role not being the feeble guy they're going to visit at the nursing home,
Right.
right? I mean, you're gonna be quite the opposite. You're gonna be if
Yeah.
they're sprinting with them, and so I think, um, that example continues as they get in their 20s and 30s. They really notice like the difference um, in your life versus the lives of other people they see as your age as they get in the workforce and they see more and more people. It drives it home that they're like, oh, that's why my dad is crazy. That's why my dad does all these weird things. That's why my dad raised us this way to see. I mean, when teenagers, they start pushing back. 20-year-olds, they start thinking you're a little weird, you're a little crazy. They'll get to a point, they're like, oh, now
Mhm.
I get it. And the experience of seeing what else is out there and what everybody else is doing as they connect A plus B equals C. This is how
Right.
you get to be like your parents that
Right.
are either healthy or not.
Right.
And I think yeah, that's invaluable. I mean, they have to see it happen. They have to see it play out, and they're getting to walk it out with you. That's a great opportunity for them.
Yeah.
That's really great. Uh, I think again, your teaching platform on this. There's a lot of people interested in this. I know people in Nashville from doctors, all walks of life, who are moving, and people coming here from California that were in the cities, and they're buying land,
Mhm.
and they're buying, anywhere from 20 to 40 acres because they want to have that food security and they want to
Right.
know and build source it themselves and they want to have um, a different life. It's a little bit slower life when they do come home from work, even if they
Yeah.
if they don't work remotely, if they come home from work, it's like it's calmer, it's quiet,
Yes.
it's a very different life. And so I think that's fantastic. You guys are making that move to create
Yeah.
that.
I mean, the challenge honestly is, if you want to have it, if you want to enjoy both worlds, you want to have your modern life, but you also want to have, the slower life, combining both together can actually be more stressful than
Sure.
picking one, and it's a very delicate line. And we've noticed this over and over again where we're like, okay, we want to travel, we want to, I
Right.
want to expand the business, I want to do, now I'm launching, I launched a podcast and this and that. And at the same time, I want to have more animals. Well, there are only so many hours in the day,
Right.
and so it's kind of a give and take. You have to. I think it's always a good idea, or at least it's been working, reasonably well for me, to give something away from the modern and take something from the old. Something slower, replace fast with slow, and doing this strategically, I think has a dramatic impact on your happiness overall, because
Mhm.
it's different to get something done and see the results of your labor in terms of something that is, an egg you can eat, or
Mhm.
a rabbit you can eat, or whatever the case might be, versus, oh, I got a, promotion at work, or, a certificate, or, my boss congratulated me because I did a job well done, and tomorrow it's forgotten,
Right.
and you have to start over again. I mean, in a worst case scenario, you're sales, professional, and you have your, you reached your quota, you busted your quota, you got 50% more. well, guess what? Next year, your standard quota is that plus 50%, and then you have to bust it again. Otherwise you're out. And this is the kind of hamster wheel that I don't want to be part of, and that I hope our kids will never be part of, and that's why we are intentionally getting some of the slower stuff back in, and enjoying that, and realizing that it makes you actually happier than some of the
Right.
stuff that you chase in your modern world. So
For sure. Yeah, it's all you to be self-employed as well. So to be
yeah,
really, your own boss and work from home, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's the dream, and the dream takes work,
yes,
but you're working for yourself.
yes,
You're building your dream. You're not building someone else's.
that's
You're,
right.
and I think that's everybody's, in our community, that's the drive. That's the goal, in that self-sufficiency and security. It's not just food. It's in your income and everything else you do. It's like you've created the environment, and you answer to yourself. And if it's
Right,
a long work day, or if it's a rest day, or whatever it is, or it's a travel day, it's up to you.
right, yes.
And so,
And it can be done. I mean, that's the
oh
one
sure,
thing. I always I tend to visualize what I want to accomplish, and I tend to really feel myself into that moment when I accomplish it. Meaning that I trick my brain into thinking it happened already. I'm already feeling the emotions of something that I want to accomplish, even though I haven't accomplished it yet. But I've noticed that that helps me really get into the right mindset to pursue whatever I want to pursue. And I don't come from a rich family or anything. I started from scratch. I mean, I had a lot of help along the way. I'm sure I was lucky along the way, but I also think that with the right mindset and with the right attitude, you kind of attract that help. There are those who are perpetually unlucky, and there are those everything they touch turns into gold kind of thing. I'm neither of those. I think I'm somewhere in the middle, but things appear to be working out more often than not for me. And I very much think that has to do with my positive mindset towards what I want to accomplish, and
Mm,
being convinced that if anyone can do it, I can do it as well.
right.
And as long as you have somewhat realistic goals. But I didn't fall out of bed one day and say, oh, now I'm a farmer, or now I'm this or that. No, but it was a work in progress. But it works out. If I can do it, anyone can. I have nothing special, that you don't have, or that someone else doesn't have either. I'm not incredibly smart. I'm not incredibly anything. I just
Showed up
make
and
it
work.
happen. And
Show up and work. And I love that your story with your family. Like you said, you're from Germany. Your wife's from Costa Rica. You're
I'm
both
from
immigrants.
Austria. Don't say I'm from
I'm
Germany.
sorry. Forgive me. Forgive me. I forgot you're from Austria. My mistake. From Austria.
Just
But you're
kidding.
both immigrants here.
Yes.
And I mean, I mean, that's a story. It's like you show up here and you work. You worked hard and you created something. Like you said, your family is in Austria. Her family's in Costa Rica.
Mhm.
You didn't have that support. You didn't have
Right.
that kind of like, built-in launch pad so much from. I mean,
Yeah.
you had it for when you were young adults, but when you came here, and you start raising kids.
Right.
Well, that's a lot on you.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you guys have created this I think, is a story in and of itself, um, of hard work, and you guys focused, and you knew what you wanted, and you just kept that ahead of you, and you kept doing it. You guys were like-minded. I mean, you guys really were on the same page, as a couple, with what you wanted to create for your family.
At least in the same book. Yeah, not always on the same page.
I understand. I get it. Yes, you're close enough. It's like,
Yeah.
but that's good. I mean, that's give and
Make
take.
it work.
That
Yeah.
allows for that friction, allows for change, and for questioning, like,
Yes.
your beliefs, and let you adapt,
Yes.
and improve. I mean, that's what you want in that
Right.
relationship, is someone who's questioning and pushing and challenging just enough that you're moving forward in the same direction.
Right.
So I think that's brilliant. Amazing. No, I get it, man. I've been married 26 years. That's like, I get it. So I understand what you're saying. As long as you're in the same book, you're doing all right. Well, Mike, this has been awesome. I appreciate you coming on and sharing this, because I think a lot of people have questions and curious about this, and are considering what you guys are doing, which is moving and more land and being more self-sufficient. Where can
You
people
know,
reach you? Or go ahead.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I was about to say, you don't need 45 acres. I mean,
No.
I've watched plenty of YouTube videos with people, raising anything on an acre, on half an acre, on a quarter of an acre, on an eighth of an acre. I mean, you're not going to be, doing management intensive grazing on an eighth of an acre. But rabbits, a good example, takes very little space. If you raise them in a colony like we do, they don't make any noise. They don't, smell if you, take care of it, doing deep littering or whatever. Chickens, even if you grow, a couple of tomato plants or whatever it might be, you can do certain things on very small acreage, on very small spaces. And I encourage anyone, even if it's only, growing some of the herbs you use in the kitchen, take control of something, and be proud of that. Instead of, waiting for someone, to give you, 50 acres, that's probably not going to happen. And so, start somewhere, don't wait for anything, do something today, and then, move from there. But in terms of finding me, I mean, michaelkummer.com, is the blog where I, post most of my like health, fitness, biohacking kind of thing. The Kummer Homestead is a relatively new addition to our digital platform, where we, publish stuff farming related, homesteading related,
Is that kummerhomestead.com?
kummerhomestead.com.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And same applies to YouTube. We have, one channel, Michael Kummer, for, biohacking stuff,
Right.
the Kummer Homestead for the homesteading stuff. We actually have been picking up content production for the homestead, and it seems to be actually doing better than my main channel, because there appear to be more people interested in that than some of the other things. And
It's a
fewer
huge
people talking about it also, I should say.
Right.
Primer Shift podcast, you mentioned it before, that's my podcast where I really try to bridge, the whole concept of, modern life with our, ancestral kind of, strategies, how we can mesh that together into something that works as a family. So check that out as well. And then, on Instagram, also both Michael Kummer and Kummer Homestead.
Okay. Yeah, on Instagram. I am Kummer82.
Kummer82 on Instagram, yep, and Kummer Homestead on
Kummer Homestead. Okay, I didn't know about that one. That's
yeah, we haven't really been promoting that a lot yet, but it's it's growing, and there's, I think, a lot of good stuff. If you want to go that route, you can find there, and then just as I said, do something today. Don't wait for tomorrow. Whatever you can do today,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You're going to want to learn. You don't want to plop down on 20 acres and now you're going to start learning how to grow something or how to raise an animal. That would be
do it on a fourth of an acre first, and then and then do it in a bigger scale. And that's the reason why we've been doing a lot of things. Why our backyard doesn't look like a backyard anymore, but rather than a pasture, for exactly those reasons. And learn quick. Make quick mistakes. Improve and move on, instead of trying to get it perfect and never getting anything done.
Right. Good advice. That's true for anything, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Michael, thanks again. I appreciate it. Once you get up to that farm, I might have to come down and check it out.
Yeah, please do.
Be right down the road. All right. Have a great week.
Appreciate it, man.